Yeah, let me admit like the people who just come in right now. And
Okay.
I think we're good to go. Let's take it away.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in this call today, the 26th of April, 2024. SynBio4ALL Africa is hosting our guest, Dr. Max van 't Hoff, who is a business developer at Visibuilt from Denmark. A brief biography about Dr. Max. Dr. Max got a PhD in synthetic biology at the Technical University of Denmark. Based on an interest in startups and commercialization of science, he switched to the business side. He consulted startups in therapeutics and medical devices, food and industrial biotech. He now works as a business developer for Visibuilt, a startup making sustainable asphalt with fungi. So, members, join me today. Welcome Dr. Max for our event. Dr. Max, you're welcome, and members and other people from Africa and elsewhere in the world are waiting to hear from you. And this meeting will be moderated by ICE. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. Sorry for the interesting setup with the two screens, because for some reason my video wasn't working. But can everybody see my screen now shared? Good.
It looks perfect. It looks perfect.
Thank
Max.
you very much for having me for this talk, where I'll dive a bit into bioprospecting and biobusiness. And so before we get started, I thought it would be nice to, instead of just having me for 2 hours saying stuff to you, well, first we have to welcome. Please turn on your camera, so it's not just the three of us that you see, but actually the rest of us. There will also be some parts that will be a bit more interactive, where we split in groups and discuss with each other. And then also let's do a poll, because people join from all kind of different places, and it would be nice to know who's in the crowd and who actually we're talking with and have around. So then I need to just stop sharing with this one and share with the other one. So if everybody could scan the QR code, or if you go to menti.com and enter the code 66136584, then there will be a very short poll to find out who is in the room. So that also gives a bit of an insight into within the topic that we're talking about today, what are maybe some parts that are more interesting to you, and what I should highlight a bit more. I don't know if everybody was able to join now. Otherwise, the code will stay at the top, so people can still join by going to menti.com and using the code. But for everybody that's already in the room, we can start with, where are you from? I guess we have quite a diversity today of different people from different places. So it would be nice to know where the different people are from. Well, these two I expected, but okay. We have a third response. Cannot see how many people we have in total in the call. I would expect that there's a few more people that could answer. So if people joined later, if you use the at the top menti.com and then the code. But I couldn't hear that, but yes. All right. Let's continue from here. Okay. It looks like it's all getting better, working better. So a few different places that people are from. Then we'll continue with what do you study / work on. In my case, it's doing some strange things with fungi, but I'll get to that in a moment. Microbiology, that's a familiar one, probably for a lot of people here. Engineering of bacteria. Somebody else in the chat. Student science, laboratory technology. But so mostly people with the science background. So it's not that we have some business people in the room that are going to ask me insanely difficult questions at the end because they already knew everything. That's good for me, makes things easier. No, but it's good to see that people with the science background are also interested in the bioentrepreneurship part that we're going to talk about today. But so definitely one neuroscience, but next to that a lot of microbial engineering, bioengineering backgrounds. Then also the question, where are you in your studies? Are you just starting or are you almost finished? Okay, we have one person in the chat who is from the bachelor. Uganda, and one PhD, some graduates, bachelor and a master. All right, and then go to the next one. Just curious what your expectations are today. You just got a title, Bioprospecting and Bioentrepreneurship. What do you expect you'll get today, or what would you like to get out of today? What is something where you're like, okay, this is definitely something I would like to hear about, something that I expect that I'll be talking about. Learn about sustaining startups. Then I'm curious if that's sustainable startups or starting a startup that stays alive over time. More details about synthetic biology. If you want me to talk about my PhD, I can talk for a long time about synthetic biology, but it will be very limited today that I'll talk about synthetic biology in the sense of the actual science. A lot of the examples that I'll be giving will be related to synthetic biology because it is the field that I'm from and interested in. Industrial bioengineering would be possible to initiate in Africa. Genetic engineering. Okay, now it's getting more alive. Entrepreneurship strategies, key insight challenges for youth-based investors, finding the right investors. I'm right in the middle of getting money from investors at the moment, so that's something that will come up with talking with investors. Move an idea from just ideated or prototyped into a venture. Yes, and then expecting to learn more about entrepreneurship in synthetic biology. Okay, so it sounds like the bioprospecting part is the part that I'll squeeze maybe a little bit and talk more about the bioentrepreneurship part because there seems to be the main interest And then there will be questions on the way. There will be room for questions. So if there's something that I didn't answer, feel free to ask them at some point. The last two questions. First one, how familiar are you with bioprospecting? Is it something you're actually already familiar with? Or you don't even know what it is that I'm going to be talking about? Could be. Before I heard the proper name, I actually didn't know myself. It was something that I apparently was interested in, but I didn't know the proper name for it. Yeah, this sounds familiar. Not sure that sounds about right. And just for the sake of time, we'll just immediately go for the last question. With the biobusiness, how familiar are you already? Based on the background, I assume that there's nobody working daily on it, but good to know what sort of the background is that people have already. Yeah, so this is something that people are already a little bit more familiar with, but no, there's still some room to work on. All right, for the sake of time, let's get started. I'll switch to the presentation again, but nice to know a bit who's in the audience. Then we're getting started. So yeah, the goal of today is to get a bit of a better understanding and maybe a first interaction with bioprospecting and bioentrepreneurship, and thereby create an increased awareness of the potential that nature has for biomedicine and bioproducts, and then also first few steps into bioentrepreneurship. Sorry, the first few steps of bioentrepreneurship. There's a long way and a lot of details that you can go into, so I'll just go a bit from the start and sort of the highlights there. And then with the questions, if there's specific things you're more interested in, you can let me know. So we started with a short poll. I'll now tell very shortly about myself, what my background is. Then we'll first do the bioprospecting part. I might squeeze that a little bit more so we have a bit more time for the biobusiness part. And in both cases, we'll do a short workshop where we'll divide it in groups so you can discuss among yourselves. And then discuss that afterwards, and then have some room for questions in both cases. Also, if you have along the way already questions, feel free to write them, but there's definitely room at the end of each part for questions, but feel free to ask them along the way. So as you might have seen already from my last name, I'm originally from the Netherlands. I did a bachelor and master there at the TU Delft in life science technology, which is industrial biotech was the direction that I went for. As last part of my master, I had to do an internship, which I did at Biosyntia, which is a startup in Copenhagen that's making vitamins with bacteria. So I was doing some genetic modifications of the microorganisms there to increase the production. One of the founders of this startup is a professor at the Technical University of Denmark, DTU. And so I ended up in his group doing a PhD in microbiome engineering. So the focus here was to use bacteria for the production of therapeutic compounds inside the human body. And so I was mostly working on doing different things to make this delivery work better. So a lot of engineering of the bacteria, for instance, to make them stick to the tumor cells. And what I wanted to do, for example, was to get them to express only when they're attached. So you have only very local production. Unfortunately, that part didn't work. But if you're interested, my whole thesis can be found online. It's a bit long read, I would say, but maybe if you're interested, go ahead. Then after the PhD, I made a bit of a switch. I started working for Nordic Bioventures, which is a company that's helping startups with the commercialization of their technology, and all startups in life science technology, so ranging from therapeutics and medical devices to food and bioindustrial startups. And then next to that, we also started our own startups, where we then got people together, did ideation workshop, came with ideas, and then the money that we made on helping the startups, we invested it into these new startups that we started ourselves. And now, as was said in the introduction, I'm working for Visibuilt, which is a startup also here in Copenhagen, which is making a new asphalt binder. So normally asphalt is made from rocks and bitumen, an oil-derived product. And this bitumen needs to be kept at very high temperatures to be able to work with it. And so instead, we want to use fungi to bind the rocks together. And these fungus can live very happily at 25 to 30 degrees. So there's a potential big energy saving and CO2 reduction there. And I'm working on the business development there. And so you might wonder how I ended up on this business side with its technical background. And so actually already in my bachelor, I did a half year of business courses, and I was active in different committees and organizations. When I was at Biosynthia, I already did some business development work because with startups, that's one of the nice things. They often don't have enough people to do everything. So they just, if you're interested in something, you can say, okay, I'm happy to spend some time helping out with this, and they're happy to let you because they are short on hands anyways. During my PhD, I did courses on intellectual property, science communication, and I joined an organization called Rebels, which is a volunteer organization that's promoting and educating about bio-entrepreneurship. And so basically just being interested in the area and getting surrounded by people got me to know more and more and find out different things where I could learn more. And that's also how I got to know the founders of Nordic Bioventures, and that's how I sort of got into the space. So it was just for me an interest, and then now I can combine this interest with the interest in science, working for a startup that's still doing cool science and then doing the business development there. But that was more than enough about me. So let's go into the first part, bioprospecting, with the question, why look at nature? And so this graph has different years on the x-axis and then a number on the y-axis. And this is showing the number of drugs between 1981 and 2014 that were all natural compound or derived from a natural compound, so found in nature. And so in the case of small molecule drugs approved by the FDA, in this period, around 33% were natural products and derived from, and in the case of cancer drugs, it was even 50%. Nature has developed over millions of years and has created this huge variety of different compounds and different solutions to all kinds of different things that is much bigger than what you can come up with in one PhD or in 10 years of your work. So in that sense, making use of what nature has to offer can be very beneficial. Yes. Oh, it was a bit slow. So bioprospecting is defined as the systematic and organized search for these products that are useful. They can be coming from plants, microorganisms, animals. You can get it from all kinds of different places. And then you can commercialize it for the benefits of society. And for instance, historically, it was often the case that people living at a certain place already over a long period of time found out that actually if you take this plant or if you take this honey coming from the bees, they have certain properties that actually, if you start looking into it, have a compound that can be used for medicine, for example. Some examples are, for example, the accidental discovery of the penicillin mold by Alexander Fleming, who went on holiday, came back and found out that these fungus were growing and that the area around it didn't have any bacteria. Another one is aspirin. It's actually coming from a tree, the precursor of aspirin. Then morphine is originally coming from the poppy plant. Then there's one that I'll talk about in a bit more detail in a moment, which is called triptylite, which is a compound that can be used for infertility in rats. And I'll get to that in a moment, why you would want to care about infertility in rats. So how is this linked then to synthetic biology? There's different ways you can produce these compounds that you found in nature and that you think could be interesting for different kind of purposes. One thing is you can harvest it from the natural sources. For example, the morphine is still nowadays isolated from these plants. Penicillin is still produced with molds. They're just much more efficient than they used to be. Then there's also chemical synthesis. But in a lot of cases, the production that you get from natural sources is way too little for the amounts that we need in our society, or the compounds are way too difficult to do a chemical synthesis to get to these compounds. So that's where, and aspirin was a good example, that's where recombinant production comes in, where you then take these genes, for instance, from a plant and put it in a bacterium or a yeast and use that to do the production, and thereby being able to make a much more efficient production. So, for example, is the triptylite that I'll get to again in a moment. So I thought it would be nice to then highlight two examples in a bit more detail. So the first one is the penicillin one, which I already mentioned was originally discovered by Alexander Fleming, and found that this penicillin was good in combating Staphylococcus bacteria. However, this was not something that could be used yet in the for treating people. There were actually 10 years later, Flory and Chain, two people at Oxford University, who worked on this to improve the production of penicillin, because if you have this mold, if you then take that and would inject it into people, that wouldn't work. You need to find out what is the compound that's being produced, isolate that, and being able to produce that in large enough quantities. And so they worked on the development of that. And at first they needed 2,000 liters of mold culture to make enough to cure one person. And actually the first time that they tested this, they tested it on a policeman in the UK who got cut when working in the garden, got an infection. And there was nothing at that time that could be done. And they tested penicillin, and it really helped. Unfortunately, they just didn't have enough. So this person actually still passed away. And so they needed to make the process more efficient to be able to produce enough. And so one thing there was Heatley, another person at Oxford, who made a makeshift fermenter to start producing it better. And then they also found a different mold from a cantaloupe that they found at the market. One of the people from the lab came back with this cantaloupe with a nice fluffy mold on it, and they tried it and it was working a lot better. And then they also did different optimizations to make it even better. And then they were able to make it a process that was efficient enough to be used. And in the Second World War that came afterwards, they expected this has saved the lives of thousands of people. And in the end, Alexander Fleming, Flory and Chain got the Nobel Prize for this. And Heatley got, for the first time in, what was it, 200 years, an honorary doctorate of medicine. Then the case that I just mentioned already, triptylite, this is a compound that was originally, they wanted to have a look if they could use it for Alzheimer's, if I'm correct. But it was not working sufficiently. But when they were testing it on mice, they found out that was actually making the male rats infertile, or I think all the rats, at least the rats infertile. And so this company thought, actually, the way we're now trying to combat rats who are trying to eat all the different grains, etc., on the land and in storages. What if we can combat this in a much more humane way, where we don't spray all kind of pesticides into our environment where we have our food? Instead, if we make these rats infertile, you don't get this huge boom of new rats all the time. And so they wanted to use triptolite for this. The problem is that if you take the plant, there's 0.0001% to 0.02% of dry weight biomass of the plant. So there's fields and fields of these plants needed to be able to produce enough. And so you just cannot do that at large scale. Next to that, it's structural and stereochemical, very complex. So the chemical synthesis is not a possibility. So therefore, they started this company called TriptoBio. They took a recombinant production. They did recombinant production with Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and in that way, got a production where they can actually now, I don't think it's approved yet, but soon hopefully start putting this into practice, and by using synthetic biology, making something that's much more humane and much better for the environment. One thing that's important to mention when talking about this topic is biopiracy. There's historically an exploitation of indigenous knowledge. I mentioned at the start, like originally a lot of this was coming from tribes in different places, that a lot of Western companies went there, took the knowledge, commercialized it, and never in any way compensated the people who had this knowledge and where they got it from. And so therefore, there's now two different things that happened in the meantime. There was a Convention on Biological Diversity in 1992, and there's the Nagoya Protocol from 2014. And so the people that agreed on this are a lot of different countries. And so there's different rules around how to in a good way, use the knowledge that you get from certain places, and then also compensate the country or the tribe or the place where this is coming from. And so the company that I'm currently working on, Visibuilt, is actually also faced with this. You would say we're making asphalt with fungi. How would we be working with this? So the different strains of fungi that we're testing are coming from different places. And so in that way, we would have to pay to the different countries where it's coming from. And because of that, a few weeks ago, we actually went into the forest here to harvest a lot of different fungi, just from nature, from fallen trees, from the ground, etc., and are testing those now, because in that case, we're not taking it from anywhere else, and we don't have to worry about breaking any rules or taking it from a place, and from a commercial perspective, having to pay every time that we're producing with these strains. So these are important to know when you use compounds or strains coming from different places around the world, that if you use these, make sure that the places where they come from are properly compensated. So I have a challenge here, but maybe if you want, we can first go for first few questions. I saw there were some things in the chat. I don't know what exactly came up. I'll quickly explain. No, let's first see what was said in the chat, if there was any questions, or if there are any questions so far. No, okay. Are there any questions so far? Otherwise, we'll go for the workshop, and then we'll have the questions afterwards. Then I need to share my screen again. So the idea is that for 5 minutes, you get a different ecosystem, So if we can split the group in a moment in, I see we're 20 people. So if it's groups of 4, and then within your group, if you can brainstorm about potential biological resources that could be from an area. So if you're group 1, it would be tropical rainforest. If it's group 2, it's deep ocean. Group 3 is polar region, etc. Maybe take a quick screenshot or take a picture of this, because when you get in the group, it will not be there anymore, and you don't know yet in which group you'll be. So it's good to be ready for that. Optionally, you can also think about if there's any potential interesting product that's being used in your native country, some herbal medicine, some pesticide, etc. Where you think, okay, this is a natural way where we're doing something now. Actually, if you would take that, put it, for instance, with synthetic biology in a microorganism, make it more efficient, you could make a nice business out of it. That's also an option. I don't know, Ice, or can you make it into groups? Yes, perfect.
Room. So those who are in the call, like feel free to jump into the breakout room. I think it pre-assigned, like automatically assign you into each room. For us who are hosts, like we can hop in and out if you want to like join the discussion as well. So let's do a quick workshop here and try to discuss what could be a good potential. I will hop in and share with you like the list of what we have here, so that we can keep in mind that like what we have so far in our like list of landscape that we can work on as well. So okay, I see people are joining into the breakout rooms now.
I guess I'll stay here and then see in 5 minutes or so how things went.
Yep. Let me make an announcement real quick.
I think for those who are still here, they just need to look at the breakout rooms and they see where their name belongs, and then they tap join.
Yeah, I will hop into the breakout room to check how they're doing as well.
Yeah, I don't think I can hop between the rooms, so I guess I'll just stay here and see when they come back.
Oh, because you are not. I see. Your phone is not in the co-host stage.
Exactly. Then I need to sort of with both, or yeah, I not sure what the best way to do that.
Yeah, I will make you co-host so that like I think like you may have this kind of like breakout room style event again.
Yeah.
So in the next round might be easier there. Okay, I'll hop in and I'll come back in a few minutes.
Yeah. So for the people who are back in the room already again, please scan the QR code, because then we can in a moment write down some of the different options that everybody talked about. But I see that people are still in the room, so that sounds like gives a good sign that people are still in the middle of discussion. Yes, welcome back, everybody. Please scan the QR code. Then in a moment, we'll write down all the different, or some of the different options that you discussed, and then talk about it in a moment, what you came up with. Or use the link that I shared. Already go to the next page, because then let's see where it's hidden somewhere behind. Yes, there. So you can still join via the link that I sent or via menti.com and then this code. And for everybody else, you can write down some of the products you came up with, and then we can talk a bit about that, all the different brilliant ideas that I can steal now to create my own startup. First one, strong microbe from savanna. Yeah, that's extremophiles. Extreme places are good places to look for different organisms. They usually have special qualities. There's a nice story from one of the professors that I had at TU Delft, Professor Jack Konk. They want to do the conversion of xylose in a better way than that they were doing at that point. And so they were thinking, where can we find a place to find this? And they were thinking, okay, where does xylose, where do we find a lot of that? And so in the end, they came up with having a look at the different microorganisms in the excrements of elephants, looking in elephant poop, and finding some microorganisms there that had the enzyme that they needed. So looking at, for example, the savanna for microorganisms that are resistant to heat and being able to work at high temperatures, or maybe really cold temperatures or big fluctuations, can be a really interesting one to look at. Thin layers of calcium carbonate from coral reefs. Would it be production of thin layers of calcium carbonate? Or I don't know if anybody from the group that made this one would like to give some explanation about this, because it sounds interesting, but I don't completely get what you would want to do. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you were saying. Okay. Or otherwise, if somebody wants to tell what the snails in the swamp in Uganda have as special properties, it's that's also an interesting one.
Max is requesting the person who sent that snails in swamps at Lutembe Bay in Uganda have some special properties to unmute and explain more. Maybe anyone who has knowledge about those snails to unmute and explain more.
Don't think we're going to get an explanation, but I think I find it an interesting one. I'm curious what you can do with the snails. Maybe it's a very good way to not share your secrets of your startup here. That's a good start. Yeah, this one is already an existing one indeed. Artemisinin with the treatment of malaria. There's a company in the US, Amaris, who made that one. I also like the clothes from banana fibers. That looks like a thing that could be very comfortable wearing and very sustainable to do. Before we go, so first of all, thanks for sharing. Nice to see what kind of different things you came up with. Before we switch to the entrepreneurship side, any questions that you have about this part, you can also still ask them later, but maybe something that came up now, feel free to unmute, or if you prefer to write something in the text. Otherwise, we'll switch to the entrepreneurship part in a moment, and then you can still ask questions in the chat if you want to.
Thank you so much, Max. I have a question.
Yes.
I see most of the discussion in bioprospecting side, they normally go to the side of health, innovation in line with health. Do we have more innovation which are beyond health in bioprospecting?
Yes. So, for example, the example that I gave with the elephant, where for instance, the elephant poo that they found the enzyme. I would say what we're doing with our company, where we're using it for the asphalt binder for the fungus. There's another example. They have two different databases, sort of, at DTU here. They have one with Streptomyces and one with fungus, where they have taken samples from a lot of different places in the world, or even asked people to send samples, isolated fungi and Streptomyces from those, and now have a gigantic database. They screen for all kind of different compounds. And so I think with these Streptomyces, they now found a compound, I think it's PFA, but it is a compound that they are now spun out a company called Agrobiomics, which is using this compound in soil to reduce, to make the plants more resistant to salinity. So now with all the droughts, etc., one of the problems there is that the salt concentration gets really high, and that the plants cannot handle that well. And so they got this compound from Streptomyces to combat that. So there are some examples. Also, another one is I don't know how far they are with that, but I know with Novozymes they're working on it here, or used to work on it at least. Plastic is a huge problem in the world with all the different plastic pollution. And again, if you want to break down this plastic, where's a good place to look? In the plastic. And so they have indeed found some microorganisms, and I think some yeast now as well, that can break down plastics. And so they've taken these genes and put them in a microorganism that is better, more optimized at producing. And I don't know if they want to use microorganism or that they try to extract the enzymes. But I think that could be a really cool way to reduce the plastic problem, if you can use the microorganism and synthetic biology to break down the plastic. I think those are a few examples. I hope that answers your question. Good. Then, unless there's a other immediate question, we'll continue to the bio-entrepreneurship part. Yes.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, how do you sustain the production, let's say, these microbes? Once you have identified a particular microbe which is beneficial to purposes, how do you ensure sustained production of these microbes with time? Because now you're using it, and then of course with time it will deplete. So how do you tackle that?
Yes. So I think classically what they do is that they do batch fermentation. So if you have fermentation, you can do it with a large volume, you let it run, you stop it, and you purify it. You can do fed batch, where you keep adding liquid up to a certain point and then again stop it and go. Or you can do continuous. And the problem indeed with continuous is that over time they become less and less efficient. The microorganisms don't want to do it, so they'll start to make mutation. The ones with mutations will have a higher growth rate and take over the population over time. So one way is to do it in batch. That way you use it for a certain amount of time, you stop it before it gets inefficient, and then you start with a new culture again. There's some interesting synthetic biology ways that you can also work with it. For example, there's a startup here in Copenhagen called Enduro. What they do is they link the production of, for instance, the enzyme that you want with the production of an essential enzyme that the microorganism needs for its survival. So when it will start producing less of the enzyme that you want, it will also start producing less of the enzyme that it needs to have. And in that way, there's still an incentive to keep producing the enzymes. They call it product addiction. And that's, for example, one way with synthetic biology, how you could try to keep the production at a high enough level.
Okay, cool.
All right. Other questions? Otherwise, there's still questions, possibilities for questions along the way. Then we'll now continue to the biobusiness part. So first, why would you even want to start a company? So one reason, at least for me, could be to make a positive impact on society. I think especially in the life science and the biotech area, a lot of cases for doing it is to commercialize something which you found with research, for example, or you found a problem that you think should be solved, and synthetic biology is the answer or an answer of solving that. And by doing this, you can create a positive impact on society. That's, for me at least, a big driver now with Visibuilt, that if this works and we're at some point driving on roads that have a much lower carbon impact on the world, then that would make me feel a lot better about what I've been doing the last few years. So I think that can be one reason to start a company. Another one is the freedom to pursue what matters or interests you. At bigger companies, it's often much more set, the direction, and in startups, there's much more freedom in how you want to do things. However, along the way, at some point when you get money in from investors, for example, you've promised them a certain future, and they want you to keep you to your promises. So the further you get, the more people get into the company, the more money you get in, the freedom that you have will get less and less. But as long as you're working on something that you really enjoy, that might be okay, because it's still the thing that matters and interests to you. It's very diverse, as I already alluded to in the start. There's often too much work for the amount of people that you have. You often don't have the money to get the experts in the field in. So you just need to learn about a lot of different parts. When I was working at Biosynthia, I was doing part lab and a part with the business development. Currently, I'm in business development, but next to that, I'm also helping the CEO with the fundraising. I'm looking a bit into the IP. I'm looking into regulatory. I'm talking with customers, but I'm also talking with some companies around Denmark that could potentially supply some of the substrates that we need. Yesterday there was a conference, so then all of a sudden you're talking with completely different people. There's always new things that are happening and new things to learn from, which in my opinion is a lot of fun and gives a nice steep learning curve. It's usually quite fast paced. To be able to you have very little money often, so you cannot drag it out for a long period of time because you don't have the money to spend ages on it. And second, a lot of things are happening in the world. So if you're going to wait 5 years before you get there, somebody else might done it before you. So it's a nice environment to me, with a lot of creative and high energy people that want to get things, change things in the world. And a lasting money, that I would say is actually not a very good reason to start a company, because yes, you can get incredibly rich. There's a company here that got sold for 200 million euros, and probably the founders made a good amount of money on it. But this is the exception of most of the startups. A lot of the startups fail within the first few years or stop. And a lot of them do exist, but don't make that big amount of money. And so if the incentive is to gain money, there's probably smarter ways to get money than starting a startup. So the journey starts if you think it's nice to start a startup. And then things are great, things are fun, and things are not that fun anymore at some point over time. This is another part of startups, that there are very big highs, but also very big lows. And I think this one, the thing that it doesn't illustrate correctly is that it shows one big swamp of despair. But there's, I think, a lot of different swamps of despair. There's a podcast here from the area, which is called Life Science Talent Solutions, where they interview different startups and ask them about how their experience is, and go into different parts of their technology, etc. But with one of the startups, they had to talk about their journey, and they were telling that within 1 year time, they were 3 times basically about to file bankrupt. If it had been a few more days, the company wouldn't have existed anymore. And if you then have a few different people that are working in the startup and that you're responsible for, it's very difficult and really hard. But then when you at some point get your investment, or you're developing a product and you see that the prototype is working really well, that gives really big highs. So it's an emotional journey of going up and down that I would say is inevitable and necessary perhaps, but also can be very rewarding. So I already mentioned that a lot of the startups don't make it, and so one of the big reasons for that is that people come up with great technology that work really well, but nobody actually needs. And so one of the most important things to consider when you want to start a startup is there anybody that's going to pay for this? And if your mom says, yes, I'll pay for it, that's not sufficient. You need to find out, okay, are there enough people who are interested, and do these people matter for my business? There's a really nice book, The Mom Test, from Robert Fitzpatrick, if I'm correct, but it's called The Mom Test, and that's about how to do these interviews with customers to find out what people actually are interested in. Because if you say, I have this great product, do you like it? People don't want to say no. Or if you ask people, okay, what do you need? They often don't come up with the things that they actually need. If you, in the 90s, ask people, do you need to have a mobile phone so you can look at stuff on the internet, and do you need so you can call everybody? And they're like, no, I have a phone at home. Why would I need this? So it's very difficult to get the right information. So it's really important to do the good research there, to come up with a product that's actually needed by the market. And one way to do that is to also look at a problem that needs to be solved. A problem that you have personally, or a problem that you see in your society, and find a solution to that problem. Because then if the product that you make doesn't work, you can switch, you can what they call pivot, and make something different that still solves the problem, but in a different way. And if you have a good problem that people need a solution for, It's the question, what's the solution that I've come up with? But that's a much higher chance that you'll be successful. Another important part is the team. It's a lot of time that you spend together. So having a good dynamic there is very important. And then also, especially in the first part, if you would want to get investment, the investors cannot see yet if the thing that you have is working. You only made a prototype. You haven't tested it out there in the real world, maybe. And so what they rely on a lot is the team good? Do we believe that these people can make it work? So I would say important things when starting a startup is, what is the problem that you're solving? And does anybody care about it? Is anybody going to pay for it? And what's the team that you have to do this with? And so with Nordic Bioventures, we were looking at these different 8 different parts. So the first part that we always started with was the market, the one that I just mentioned, making sure that there's people that want to pay for it. Then the second part is competition. Is there anybody else that's already doing it? That doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't do it because somebody else is already doing it. If you're the first one to go to market, it might be that the market is not ready for it yet. If you have somebody else that already does a lot of work to make the market aware of that there's a change needed, that they need something, and that there is a solution that could work for it, they're more open for your solution as well. So having zero competition is never the case, because you always have something that currently solves it, maybe not in a good way, but there's always something. There might be some competition that's developing something. And so the question is for you, how do you position yourself in comparison to them? And so here you can look at what's the unique value proposition. So you look at, what does your customer need and care about? What does your competition do really well? And what do you do? And so the area that your customer needs, what you can do, what your competitor cannot, that's what you bring as value. And so that's the thing to figure out, okay, how do I bring value? So then next, there's also tech and scale up. If you can do this only manually in a very small scale, you're never going to be able to make a business out of it. So of course you start in a small way. We're now with our company doing it with half a kilo of product at a time. We're making prototypes that are smaller circles. We now made the first tile that's still far away from an actual road. But in the meantime, we're also having a look, okay, when we're going to do this at a very big scale, when we need to make a road, how much product do we need? And how are we going to do it in that case? And make sure that the process that we develop now is also can be translated to a process and much larger scale, where parts of it will be taken over by machines. But so making sure that this is something that's doable as a business at a scale. Then there's the protection and intellectual property assets, especially if you want to go for investment. They want to make sure that you don't take their money, develop a beautiful product, and that somebody else swoops in, says, great, I'll take this and start marketing this underneath a different name. And so that's why you want to have some protection, often in the case of a patent, but it could also be a trade secret. For example, if you have a process that's very difficult to patent, because in patents you describe what it is that you protect, and if you describe your process, it's very easy for other people to say, okay, this is how you do it, then I'll just change it a bit here, change it a bit there, but I get to the same endpoint. So, for example, there you have trade secrets. People usually don't tell how they're doing it, but they protect the product that they have at the end and the use that they, what they do with this product, for example. But so that's very important to think about, okay, how are you going to protect what makes you unique? Then there's a regulatory strategy. Always there's some regulatory, there's some rules around how you can use what you have. In the case of medicines, of course, there's very strict rules around all the different tests that need to be done to get the approval to be able to use it in humans. We luckily don't have the same thing as in IT, where they say move fast, break things, take a pill, just give it to your friends and see whatever happens. It's not the best way to do life science research. So there's all kind of rules around it, and understanding these rules can really help in the timeline of your company. It would be detrimental for your company if you find a way to do something really well, have it ready for the market, and then find out, we need to wait 1 year before we get regulatory approval. So you need to see where in your timeline you need to get involved with that. Then another important part is the team. As I already mentioned, if you, for instance, look at investors, they'll look very much about what are the qualities in your team. Are you able to do what you're promising? Looking at the different capabilities. And so you can, for example, look at people as a T-shape. So you have deep knowledge on specific aspects, and you have broad knowledge about a lot of different things you know a little bit. And so looking at, okay, what is the specific knowledge in the team? What do we cover? You can have a look, okay, this is what we need to achieve. Do we have the capabilities to be able to work on that? And this is always something that can be developed. When I started, I didn't have business development experience after my PhD, or very little, and that's something that I've developed over the few years. So it's not static, but it's good to see, okay, where is a combination of experience and interest. And then also the culture there. In startups, culture is very dependent on the people you have there. And culture is not something that you can just let happen, or if you don't do anything about it, it will develop. It always will be there. So it's good to take sort of an active approach in seeing, okay, how do you want your culture in your startup to be? Then there's the partnerships and exit plans. So especially if you work with investors, they'll want to at some point get their money back. And so it's good to know, okay, how do we move forward with this company? Do we at some point go to an IPO, initial public offering? So this is when you go to the market and you sell a part of your company to the public or different people. And so it's a public traded company. Or in some cases, especially for instance with pharma, medical innovations, drugs are often sold to big pharma companies. So that's an acquisition in that case often. There's also the possibility for licensing. This is where you take your patent and you give the use of the patent to a company in exchange for money. And so it's good to know, okay, what's the direction that you're going for? And so the last thing that we normally would look at is the investment readiness. And that's sort of like, okay, do you understand all these different parts of the startup? Do you understand where you are, where you need to go? Do you have the capability to do this? And if you talk with an investor, what are the different things that they will ask, and do you have prepared for that? So these are the things that we focused on with startups that were already a bit developed. And so if you start a startup yourself, I would say start with the top part. Start with the market, the competition, the technology. Figure out there, what do you want to do? What problem do I want to solve? Is there interest? Is there competition? Is it something that's technical, feasible, and can I potentially scale this up? And a lot of the startups, a lot of the unicorns, so a unicorn is a startup that has reached a valuation of 1 billion. A lot of them didn't start with the idea that became a lot of money. They often made a few switches at the start. Your first idea doesn't have to be the final idea that will make the money. But so you start with something, and then with the more you learn, you can tweak and adjust and get to a point where you say, okay, this is actually something that we can make work. There's a very nice example here of a company that is making nowadays media for cultured meat. They originally wanted to make the cultured meat themselves. And then they started figuring out, okay, wait, cultured meat, to get that approved, you need to get a non-food application here in Europe, where you need to get approval that you can use this. This kind of application will take years to get. And so instead, they decided to make media, because there's now a lot of different cultured meat companies. They all need media to grow their cells. And so they started with one idea, got insights from the competition, from the technology, and in this case also regulatory, and based on that pivoted to go in a different direction. Yeah, so start with the first part, and then over time build on that and improve. You don't know everything at the start. Also, we now submitted to an investor what is the price going to be of our product, how much market share do we expect it will have in 10 years' time. We're now starting first with guesses based on what we know from what we've read and comparing with other companies. And over time, we'll start improving from these assumptions. But a lot at first is unknown. And from there, you just start building. That's part of the startup journey. So I mentioned already several times the need for investment. In the case that you are starting an IT business, if you're making an app, in that case, you don't necessarily need to get investment. In the case of synthetic biology, having a drug developed, making a compound for agriculture that you need to do huge field tests to see if the plants grow better. There's enormous amounts of money needed to do all this development. And that's why there's often investment needed in synthetic biology startups. And so a few different ways are bootstrap. And so in that case, you take money that you make and you reinvest it in your development. This is not often something that can work. There's a company here where they found a few proteins that can be used for proteomics. And they immediately found some people that want to buy it, some big, like well, I don't know if it's Thermo Fisher, some big of these companies that supply equipment to labs. And so in their case, they can actually do some sales, use that to grow, and so keep slowly growing by taking the revenue that they make and reinvesting it. But in a lot of cases, it will take a lot of time before you get to the point where you make money. In the case of our startup, we don't expect that we'll do any sales until 2026, 2028. And until the time, we still need a lot of money to do the research. And so we will need money in some way. Another option is crowdfunding. Again, that's often difficult to get large enough amounts. Early stage startups can, for example, get money from business angels. These are individuals that have quite some money available and invest that in startups. For example, people that have had their own startup, made a lot of money, and now want to use that to invest in others. These individuals are usually also a bit more involved themselves, not always, and they are limited in how much they can spend because they're individual persons. So often this is in early stages of the startup that it can give some money. The next thing is venture capital. So for example, pension funds would give their money to these professional investors, and they have a fund of 100, 150 million, sometimes even $1 billion. and they use that to invest in startups. And then after 10 years time, usually they need to give the money back to the pension fund with an increase. So as a result of that, they bet on different startups to see, okay, we need to get this increase in money so we in the end can keep some for ourselves and give it back to the pension fund, or wherever they got the money from. And then the last one is family offices, and this is somewhat comparable to the business angels. In some cases, they're small and they have similar finances as the business angels. In some cases, they are extremely wealthy. There are some big fashion brands, for example, where the families behind these fashion brands invest the money. And so there's different family offices that have large quantities of money. They often invest in causes that they feel attached to. For example, somebody in their family has passed away or has a certain disease. You can often see that they'll invest large sums of money in different startups that work on that kind of topic. Or in some cases, they are idealistic and they want to do something about the climate. And in some cases, it's also just pure from a monetary point of view that they want to make money. And then the last part, credibility, that's linked to what I mentioned at the last slide at the end, is that when you talk with these business angels, venture capital, family offices, it's important to show that you know what you're talking about. So it's good to do your homework beforehand with getting an understanding of what the market is you're in and how things are working there, and what we called in Nordic Bioventures anti-fragile. So when you get impact, you don't break, but you take it up and you get better from it. So use what you get as feedback as negative comments, as input from different places, and use that to grow. And so that's an important thing with sort of with this space, to make use of the inputs that you get from around you, but also a lot of people have a lot of opinions. So also do what you think is important yourself. That's difficult to figure out when you need to listen to the information, the advice, and when not. But one investor will say, the way you're doing it now, it will not work that way. You need to do it in a different way. And another one will think that's an incredible way that you're doing it. So know what you want to achieve and be open for feedback and see what's useful from there to learn from that and grow. One more slide on the investment part, because it might be still a bit abstract. So you start, I don't know if you can see you can see my mouse, good. You start the idea phase, then you start with, for instance, 2 co-founders, and you have a 50-50% share of the shares. Then after a while, you need to get an investment, and then there's different names. The first round is, for example, a pre-seed round or a seed round. Then you get series A, B, C, D. A lot of different names. Basically, you have subsequent rounds where you get money in. And so when you want to get this money, you have to give them something back. And so you give them a part of your shares. And so here you can see that the founders have now less shares, and they've given some to a business angel. And we'll ignore the option pool for a moment. That's something that you can use to give stocks to your employees as an incentive to keep them happy. But so with each subsequent round, the founders will give more and more of their shares to the investors. And you can say, okay, in the end, I only end up with 10% of the thing where I once had 50%. But if at the first part you had this idea, it was worth nothing. So you had 50% of nothing. Or let's say, okay, it was worth 1,000 euros. So you had 500 euros. In the end, if you would have 10% of a company that gets sold at 750 million, Somebody hold it on it. Okay. If you have 10% or maybe even 1% of a company that gets sold at 750 million, you have 7.5 million with only 1%. And so that's sort of the idea over time, is that you're getting a smaller piece of a bigger pie. And in the end, you all share in this pie, and hopefully get a good piece of that was worth the whole journey. But a lot of companies don't make it all the way. Somewhere along the way it goes wrong. But if you make it there, then there's the potential of getting a big exit. I think there was the different parts to discuss about bioentrepreneurship. I tried to sort of show a few different parts from the start to the journey a bit. There is a lot more that could be discussed there. But if you have any questions, we'll go to that after the challenge, I guess. We'll first go to this for a moment. So you just came up with different products in the groups. And so if you now could be put in the same groups again, you could have a think, okay, for this product, what would be the customers? What kind of competition would you have? And what was this unique value that I would bring? And if you have time, you could also have a look, okay, would I sell this as a business to another business that's making something with it? Or would I sell it to consumers? How would my business look? How would I make money out of this? If it was a bit too abstract, the idea that you had before, then you can also switch and come up with something different. The idea here is not to do online research and figure everything out, but just to have a quick brainstorm about it. And so if you have still time left, then you can consider how this can be done in an ethical way. So like I was talking before about respecting indigenous knowledge, or potential sharing the benefits with the country where it's from, the area where it's from, etc. So, Ice, if you could put everybody back into the groups again. Thanks. And then I think around in 10 minutes, we'll then switch to a short discussion and then the opportunity for all the last questions.
So just for around 10 minutes, everyone. I will put everyone back into the breakout room again in a minute. Okay, now every room is open.
So I think everybody should be back again.
Yes, I believe everyone is back.
Great. All
Welcome
right,
back, everyone.
then I'm curious what people came up with. Is anybody willing to unmute and for a moment share what you came up with as the product, the customer, competition, and the value that you have?
Okay, Max, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. In the last break room, we were tasked with a question on potential resource from the deep sea, and we thought that algae are in abundance in the deep sea. So our idea was to come up with a supplement that has nutrients that have been extracted from this algae from the deep sea. Then we recreate a supplement product with essential nutrients and vitamins, and we sell that product to consumers. When it comes to competitors, it can be a little bit difficult because it probably competition might be from industrial processed supplements like the omega-3. It's a natural competitor. When it comes to the the unique value proportion. I can say because out of the deep sea we have so many species of algae, the novel species will provide consumers with very beneficial nutrients that is not very much available of the. When it comes to business model, I think that's a tough part, but yeah, still think about it. Okay.
All right. That sounds really, really good, really interesting. There's definitely several different companies that have started now with algae. So I think this is something that's that is a good idea that probably more people would be interested in. One thing that could be very interesting is that with a lot of algae, they grow it on sun. But if you get it from the deep sea, there might be less sun available there. So it would be interesting to see how they grow and if we can mimic that in some way, for example, to make it more efficient. But yeah, nice discussion. Anybody else that would like to share what they talked about, or maybe has a question that you would like to ask? Because we also have now some time to ask some questions about the whole session.
I have a question, Max.
Yes.
When you're talking about the processes in the startup development, is this one on regulatory? Let me just take regulatory policies. For me, I think it's one of the most toughest part when it comes to starting because now you have to deal with lots of bureaucracy and policies with public governments and some regulatory bodies. So how do you tackle that, especially now? Let's say your team, you don't have someone specialized in policies and some of these issues. Do you go around with that?
Yes, good question. So I think there's a first part where you can find out a lot by one, doing research yourself on the internet, two, ask people that are smarter than you. There are a lot of people that are smarter than me in different regulatory parts. I have been asking around for the current company Visibuilt at a lot of different places. For example, people that are working with how normally new products are being regulated. So in this case, we're with the asphalt industry. So they sometimes do have some new polymers that they use, for example. So I asked, how do you, for the asphalt industry people, okay, in those cases, how was this regulated? What were the things you had to look at? I asked the government. There was some place that I could ask here. There's a network of different biotech solutions that I asked. So there's a lot of different places where I asked to first get some insights, and that will give you maybe not all the details, but it will give you an idea of what directions you need to look at. And that's good for the starting point. And then over time, when you get more money, at some point you can hire a person to do the actual paperwork when you get to that point. But I think a lot of the stuff can be done by yourself beforehand.
Okay, cool.
There's a question in the chat.
Okay. This is what you came up with, the pigmented bacteria to serve as a sort of dyes and paints. That's a nice one. Curious, where would you get the pigmented bacteria from? Any ideas? Because there indeed definitely are a lot of different beautiful ones. Would somebody from this group like to share anything about what you discussed around the pigmented bacteria? Okay, you're writing. Enzymes extracted from mealworms to degrade plastics into smaller pieces and sell to companies who recycle them. Nice idea. Why would mealworms be good at degrading plastics? Is it something they found?
Yes, yes.
All right.
Right.
And
Now,
could you also
mealworms.
use? Sorry.
I can hear you.
So these mealworms can degrade the plastics.
Yes.
All right, but using the mealworms themselves is not an option, or
It is an option. It's an option. So we discussed that we could use both options, right? Either using the mealworms themselves or using the enzymes. Well, if we go for the mealworms, we have to cultivate more worms. So, but I'm not too sure how the cultivation of worms are like, whether it's be more complex than just synthesizing the enzymes in the lab or less complex.
Yeah, I think in this case, what would be the important part is what is the most expensive. If you look at therapeutic cases, the cost of what you're doing doesn't matter that much because usually people are willing to pay a lot. In the case of the more sustainable bioindustrial solutions, it's often very dependent on at what price you can do this. And in this case, for example, the recycling of plastics, there's probably very little money that they make there. So if you then have a very expensive solution, nobody is going to pay a lot of money. So the question here, if you would make it into a business, would be, okay, have a look. How expensive is it to grow the mealworms? And how expensive is it to make the enzymes? How much more efficient is it to have the enzymes versus the mealworms? And then based on that, do an analysis. Okay, what is the best option for doing here? Because if you're not cheap enough, it's not going to work in this case, unfortunately. But I like that idea. It's cool.
Thank you very much.
Then any questions that you still have before we need to wrap up in a moment?
Like the general question about studying the business in general, or like other simple question about how to approach the business area from your science perspective is also like a good one to ask. Because Max is an expert here. Rosman.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. Really insightful. I just have a general question. So I was just wondering, how do you convince investors or people who are probably even lending you money in case you have, let's say, you have a business idea with, let's say, a family member of yours? I think it's kind of tricky when you have family in businesses, right? So I was just wondering, how do you convince them in a way to say, okay, this is my brother and he's part of my team, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. We still make a perfect team and we still produce or do what we do. So how does that play in? I just want to know. It's just a general question. Thank you.
Yes. So I guess there's the general part, how do you convince the investors? And then the second part, how do you convince them of the team dynamic? Let's start with the team part. I guess there, the thing that you need to show is that the competences that you have are going to be beneficial and going to help this startup to succeed. And then having a family member, you can see it as two ways. One, there's a risk there. On the other hand, you know each other better than you would probably ever know a person. You know exactly how you work together. And there's nowhere you're not going to make this work because you don't want to lose this relative by making the company go down. So you can actually also see it from sort of a positive point of view, where you can claim, actually, because we're family, we're going to make this work even better than if we just friends. It's just the way how you frame it. And that's with a lot of things, I guess, in the business side, how are you going to talk about things? Are you saying, well, we only have a prototype, it's not really working yet? Or are you saying, well, we're not there yet, but we have this prototype that's already showing this, this, and this, which are indicators that we get there. And so that's also getting towards the second part with what do you show investors is, for them, it's about the risk. Okay, do we think that they show enough that it's worth the risk of investing and have, sorry, the risk of investing, and then also does it have big enough potential, and sort of the combination of those two. And so if you can show them that there's a big potential, and you can show, okay, we have some evidence that we can get towards there, that's the thing that you need to show them. So for example, in the case of Visibuilt, the first thing that we did was to make some prototype, a very, very minimalistic one, where you could just see that the fungi could keep the rocks together. It was still falling apart, but it was a first thing to show. From that, we could get some money from some grants, and that then helped to further develop it to now a prototype where we can say, okay, we're still far away from actually having a road, but we have a prototype that can show you that we already came from this point to here. And if you believe in us, we believe that we can get there where there's big potential. And so I think that's sort of what you want to show the investors. Show them how you can get to this big potential that you're painting for them.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
No problem. I saw there was another person with the hand up.
Oh yeah, I'm raising my hand up. I hope I'm clear.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you very much, Mark. So I was in room 2, so we brainstormed on the idea of, the algae, and it looked quite very simple to do. But when I thought of the practicability, coming up with that product will really require a lot. And I was thinking that, okay, where I am right now, it is really a little bit very hard. It will be very difficult to come up with a product. So I think one of the reasons as to why, companies don't sustain themselves a lot is because they don't have products. Okay. We really have a lot of companies, they do a lot of conferences, a lot of other stuff, but coming up with a single product is very hard. And I think one of the reasons for that is maybe because we do a lot of theory at school, I think. And I think one of the reasons you didn't focus on that is that maybe in a lot of other countries, once a student is maybe undergrad or is doing a graduate program, they do a lot of practicals. So how can you help us to find it easy to come up with products? Maybe what innovative strategies can we easily apply to be able to really turn our ideas into products easily, because that's one of the challenges, I think.
Sorry, the last part was a bit harder to hear. So just to make sure that I understood the question correctly, you're asking how to come up with ideas at the start that could have potential to work, or how? Can you maybe repeat the final part of the question? I couldn't hear it completely.
Okay, the final part was maybe, are there any innovative strategies that you can help us so that we can employ them in order to turn our ideas into products? Because I feel most of the companies don't really sustain their livelihoods because they don't have products to keep them in the market.
Yeah. Yes. So as I mentioned during the biobusiness part, it's important to focus on the problem, not the product directly, just to make sure that there is an actual market for it. One framework that you can use for it is the double diamond, which is a a framework where you have two diamonds, where you first have one part that's diverging, then converging, then the second part diverging and converging again, due to which you get sort of two squares. You start with the first part where you would go very broad. You would come up with all kind of different problems that are out there without saying to any of them that it's not a good idea. You just get knowledge. You gather knowledge and you create this big base of knowledge to start from. And then from there, you start converging again to get to one problem where you think, okay, this is worth working on. From there, you diverge again. You start thinking about what are all kind of different solutions that you can come up for this, based on the problem that you have and the specific requirements that you put to it. So, for example, you can say, we need to improve a rocket, just to go for a random example. But we only have a limited budget. So we can come up with all kind of different amazing ways to design this, but we need to make sure that our solution is not bigger than this and not more expensive than this. So you come up with all kind of different solutions. And then from there, again, with all the knowledge, you diverge toward a solution. And that framework, the double diamond, can be used to, for example, come up with ideas for startups. And we use this as well with Nordic BioVentures when we have these workshops for coming up with new ideas for companies. We go through this process to generate ideas for new startups. And actually one of them that we came up with and is now an actual company is taking algae from the sea, fermenting them, and thereby making different food products from it. So for instance, one is caviar, a vegetarian caviar, and they're now working on different things to make with that. So that's why, for example, the algae one sounds quite interesting. But that's one framework. It can be found online, and there's different ways to iterate through it, but that's a framework that you can use. Nelson, you also have a question?
Yeah, I was asking on matters of financing startups. Do you think philanthropy is a good move to start with?
Sorry, as if philanthropy is a good move?
Philanthropy. Yeah, if it's a good move to finance startups. Yeah, when you're starting the project.
If you can get it, great. I think it's just really difficult to get it. It's if you come up with an idea, it's difficult to say. I guess I would assume it's difficult to say at the start that that you will just get money for it to do it.
Sure.
It can happen, but it's not a guarantee. And so to rely on that is a big gamble in that regard.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Also, in case, well, we potentially do more questions, but if you once more would like to go to the poll, then it would be nice for me to hear actually how did you like this session. So when if I do it in the future here or somewhere else, I can improve and include things where you think were missing or things that could have been better. So that way it will be even better next time I do this talk. So the results are anonymous and not shown. Also, I cannot see who gave which answer. So feel free to be completely honest in your feedback. Also, switch back to the slides so you can say whatever you want. I don't know, Ice, if you could share the link again in case people didn't catch the QR code. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any additional questions.
So
And
those
there's two more questions in the poll after this about a specific part. So in a moment, I'll switch to the next question. So there will be two more. But yes, like I said, sorry if you have any other questions. Ice, you have a question or?
No, I'm just trying to like say that the link in the chat should be directing you to that page, and you see what's going on there.
Yes. And then in the meantime, does anybody have a question before we close the session? And Nelson, I'm happy that you like menti.com.
Sure, yeah. I think it's very user-friendly.
Yeah, and I what I disliked myself during Corona times was that it wasn't really a lot of one-way street. And so I think this is a nice way to make it a bit more interactive.
Yeah, I think it's a good way. It's a very nice website. I think I like the concept.
Good. Then there's another question on the poll. What did you like the most? And then also for after this, if there's any questions that you have afterwards, if you at dinner tonight think, oh, it would have been great to ask this question, feel free to reach out via LinkedIn, or otherwise my email is max@visibuilt.dk. So always welcome to reach out and ask questions. I'll try my best to give you an answer. Yes, my email. I'll just write it in the chat. max@visibuilt.dk. And then for the poll, the last question, if there's anything where you think, actually, that didn't work that well, maybe the time for the discussions was too short, maybe you would have liked more of one part, less of another part, whatever you think could have been improved, would be nice to know for next time. For instance, I've done this talk before, and they were saying would be nice to have more time for questions, so that's why I try to have a bit more time for questions this time. And then if there's no more questions, I'll give the floor back to the organization. And thank you very much for your attention today, and for the organizers for having me. It was nice to talk a bit about the stuff that I enjoy doing every day. So, and have a good weekend, everybody.
Okay. Thank you so much, Max. Maybe before I give my concluding remarks, I request we hold on a little bit. We shouldn't go off because I have some remarks which I would like to make. But before I make the remarks, Ice, do you have something to say before we conclude?
Thanks a lot, Max, for going through all of these together with us. I think like it's a great experience for our community to see how to interactively work around this like growing business mindset. Especially like a lot of us don't really have a lot of business background, and most of us are scientists, right? So having you, who is an expert who has also walk through the scientific route before actually help us and like provide a lot like specialty to us in the community. So and believe like the people here we have more question and we will have like more interest and maybe if we have like further question and further growing model we can reach out to you and like see if we can make it real. Yeah.
Thank
Okay, thank you so much, Ice, for those remarks, and thank you so much for moderating this session. It has been really a wonderful one. Thank you so much, Max, for accepting my invite and coming in to talk to the mighty members of the SynBio4ALL Africa, the community of passionate people of synthetic biology in Africa. I'm really excited that we hosted you today, and you really gave such a wonderful talk, and I hope many people have learned from it, and many people will continue learning from this talk because we are going to update this talk on our website and on our YouTube channel, so that many people can continue learning from it. And I would like to appreciate people for coming in and joining in this talk. Really, it has been a perfect having you for all these hours. But I would like to conclude by announcing that SynBio4ALL Africa has organized an intermediate course in synthetic biology. After finishing the beginner's course, we are now coming in with the intermediate course. If at all you are interested in learning more about synthetic biology, studying synthetic biology for free of charge. In Europe and in the USA, synthetic biology is taught at a cost in universities and at a very expensive cost. But we are bringing this course at a free cost. So please join in and learn more. I have shared the information if at all you want to be part of the course. The course is starting on 1st of May, and it will be a Wednesday. We are having our registration up the 29th of May. Please register up to Sunday. You can register and be part of the course. And please, I call upon if you want more information about SynBio4ALL Africa, don't fail to check on our website. I have shared it in the chat. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I will always give you all the updates. You can follow SynBio4ALL Africa on LinkedIn and on Twitter. We are always there, and we are ready to serve you and to improve our community, to ensure that our community in Africa is also on the same level with the communities in the Europe and in USA. I call upon for your support and encouragement, and please be responsible and attend these sessions because synthetic biology is the future of the world. Thank you so much, and I wish you a good evening. I request Ice to close today's session.
Thanks a lot, Kato. That's great. And again, if you cannot find any relevant links to our upcoming events, please check out the website. If you Google SynBio4ALL, it should show up. All right. Thanks, Max, again for being with us today. We really appreciate like your webinar. And it's a great experience for everyone. Like we can see that in the chat showing up. So I think for the interest of time, I think that's all for today. And the recording will be available soon enough. And hope everyone has a great day for the rest of your day. Great weekend as well. All right.
Thanks.
Okay.
Have a good week, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.